When my wife, Sarah, passed away 2 years ago, I thought the hardest days of my life were behind me. 30 years we had together. She was my anchor through 2 tours overseas, through the chaos of rising through the ranks, through everything. After the funeral, after the condolences dried up and the casseroles stopped coming, I looked around our big empty house in the city and realized I couldn't stay there anymore. Every corner held a memory that felt like a knife. So I did what any rational man approaching retirement would do. I sold that house and bought a modest ranch-style place in Willowbrook Estates, a quiet subdivision about 20 miles outside the city. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and most importantly, a 2-acre lot with a detached garage. Perfect for the hobby I'd been putting off for decades, restoring vintage trucks. My grandfather had a 1952 Chevy pickup, powder blue, that I learned to drive on when I was 12 years old on his farm. I'd always promised myself that someday I'd find one just like it and bring it back to life. Well, someday had arrived, and I had the time, the space, and honestly, I needed the distraction. Now, vintage diesel trucks require fuel, and I wasn't about to be running to the gas station every other day with jerry cans, so I did my homework. I contacted the county, got the proper agricultural exemption permits, yes, they still apply if you've got enough land in legitimate use, and had a professional outfit install a commercial-grade diesel fuel pump on the far corner of my property. We're talking proper containment, leak detection systems, fire suppression, the works. Cost me nearly $15,000, but it was legal, safe, and inspected by both the fire marshal and the county. I'd been in my new place maybe 6 weeks when I met Brenda Ashworth. It was a Saturday morning in late September. Beautiful day. I was out in my driveway, sleeves rolled up, working on a 1978 Ford F-250 I'd picked up from an estate sale. The diesel pump was humming quietly as I filled the truck's tank, planning to take it for a test drive after I'd been working on the fuel system all week. That's when I heard it. The click-clack of expensive heels on asphalt.
Excuse me? Excuse me?
I looked up to see a woman in her mid-50s marching across my lawn like she owned it. Designer athleisure outfit, oversized sunglasses, blonde hair in that aggressive bob that somehow screams, "I need to speak to your manager." She was dragging a hand behind her, gesturing impatiently at a white Range Rover idling in my driveway, with the driver's side door hanging open. "Can I help you?" I asked, setting down my work rag. "Yes, you certainly can," she said, looking me up and down like I was the help. "I'm Brenda Ashworth, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. I need you to fill up my vehicle." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She pointed at my gas pump like I was stupid. "Your gas station. I need a fill-up, and make it premium." "Ma'am, that's not a gas station. That's a private diesel fuel pump for my personal use." Her face did this thing, this pinched, disbelieving expression that I'd come to know very well over the following months. "I don't think you understand," she said slowly, like explaining something to a child. "I'm the HOA president. I shouldn't have to pay for gas. Now are you going to fill my tank, or are we going to have a problem?" I straightened up to my full 6'2" height. "Ma'am, first of all, that's diesel, not gasoline. It would destroy your Range Rover's engine. Second, this is my private property and my private fuel supply. And third, I don't know you, and I certainly don't owe you free fuel." Her mouth fell open, literally fell open. I don't think anyone had said no to this woman in a very long time. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "Yes, ma'am, you just told me. You're the HOA president. That doesn't entitle you to my property or my fuel." The transformation was immediate. Her face went from shocked to red to purple in about 3 seconds flat. "This is hostile. This is threatening behavior." She actually stumbled backward, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the police. You're being aggressive, and I feel unsafe." Now, I've been in law enforcement for 28 years. I've seen this play before. The fake stumble, the theatrical fear, the phone call. She was building a narrative, and I was supposed to be the villain. I calmly pulled out my own phone and started recording. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to leave my property. You've been told no, and you're now trespassing." The community discovers the truth. She did call 911. I heard her from my driveway. Yes, I need police immediately. I'm being threatened by a man at 1847 Oakwood Drive. He's being hostile and aggressive, and I fear for my safety. I just stood there, arms crossed, camera running. 2 patrol cars showed up within 8 minutes. I recognized both officers immediately, Officer Chen and Officer Rodriguez from the Community Policing Division. They recognized me too, of course, though I could see the confusion on their faces as they approached and saw me standing there in jeans and a work shirt instead of my usual suit. "Chief Kellerman?" Chen said quietly as Brenda rushed toward them, still performing her terrified victim routine. "Officers," I nodded professionally. "This woman came onto my property demanding I give her free diesel fuel. When I refused, she became hostile and is now trespassing." Brenda's head whipped around so fast, I'm surprised she didn't get whiplash. "Chief? Chief?" The color drained from her face as the reality crashed over her like a cold wave. Rodriguez was already reviewing the body cam footage, and Chen was taking my statement. Brenda tried to backpedal, claiming she was just joking around and didn't mean to call 911. It must have been a mistake. The officers gave her a warning for filing a false report and misuse of emergency services. I didn't press charges, not yet. I just wanted her off my property. She left without another word, her Range Rover's tires squealing as she peeled out of my driveway. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned something interesting about Willowbrook Estates. Brenda Ashworth had only been HOA president for about 4 months, elected in a meeting where exactly 7 people showed up. Most residents didn't even know there was an election. She'd basically seized power in a vacuum. The previous president, a retired teacher named Dorothy Chen, no relation to Officer Chen, had run things quietly and efficiently for years. Then she'd moved to Florida to be near her grandkids, and Brenda had swooped in. I learned all this from my neighbor, Tom Harrison, a retired electrician who lived 3 houses down. He knocked on my door one evening while I was working in my garage. "Hey, Marcus, right? I'm Tom. Just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood and, apologize for Brenda." "Word travels fast," I said. "Oh man, she's been telling everyone who listened that the new guy has an illegal gas station and threatened her. Most people aren't buying it, though. Brenda's been..." She searched for the right word. "Difficult." Over coffee in my garage, Tom explained that Brenda had been on a power trip since taking over. She'd started enforcing obscure HOA rules that no one even knew existed. Fines for grass being a 1/4 inch too long, for mailboxes being the wrong shade of black, for parking on the street for more than 2 hours. "Thing is," Tom said, "your fuel pump there, that's been a godsend. During that power outage 3 weeks ago, you let me run a line to keep my wife's oxygen concentrator going. You probably don't remember, but I knocked on your door at 2 in the morning. I did remember. Tom's wife had COPD and their generator had failed. He'd seen my garage lights on, I run them off a separate system, and took a chance. I gave him 10 gallons of diesel, no charge, and helped him get his backup generator running. You also helped the Petersons, the Johnsons, and that elderly couple on Maple Street. Half the neighborhood knows you're good people. Brenda's trying to paint you as some kind of criminal, but it's not sticking." That conversation taught me 2 things. First, Brenda had serious control issues. And second, the community wasn't as unified behind her as she thought. But I also knew something else from my years in law enforcement. People like Brenda don't let go. They escalate. The HOA ambush. The summons came on a Wednesday, a formal letter, hand-delivered by someone who wouldn't make eye contact, notifying me of an emergency special session of the Willowbrook Estates HOA, to be held that Friday evening at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. The agenda had exactly 1 item: Discussion and vote regarding illegal fuel storage facility at 1847 Oakwood Drive. Subtle. I spent Thursday pulling together every document related to my fuel pump installation: county permits, agricultural exemption certificates, fire marshal inspection reports, environmental compliance documentation, proof of insurance, the contractor's licenses and certifications. I put it all in a 3-ring binder with labeled tabs. If Brenda wanted a paper war, I had been managing logistics and documentation since my Army days. Friday evening, I walked into that clubhouse with my binder under one arm and my reading glasses in my shirt pocket. The community clubhouse was one of those bland beige rooms with folding chairs, fluorescent lighting, and motivational posters about teamwork that nobody ever reads. About 30 residents were scattered around, which was apparently 3 times the normal attendance. Word had gotten out. Brenda sat at a folding table at the front, flanked by 2 other HOA board members who looked distinctly uncomfortable. She'd dressed for the occasion: power suit, hair perfect, a little nameplate in front of her that said "President" in gold letters. She saw me walk in and her eyes narrowed. This meeting of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association will now come to order. We're here to address a serious safety concern that has been brought to the board's attention. Mr. Kellerman has installed what can only be described as an industrial fuel depot on his residential property, in clear violation of HOA regulations, county zoning laws, and basic common sense. She'd prepared a whole presentation, PowerPoint slides and everything, projected on a portable screen. Photos of my fuel pump blown up to make it look more ominous. Cherry-picked excerpts from HOA bylaws. A map showing my property with a big red circle around it, like I was running some kind of criminal enterprise. This facility, she continued, clicking to a slide with the word "danger" in red letters, poses an extreme fire hazard to every resident of Willowbrook Estates. Fuel vapors could ignite, leaks could contaminate groundwater, children could be exposed to toxic chemicals, and Mr. Kellerman has installed all of this without HOA approval. Murmurs from the audience. I saw Tom Harrison shaking his head, but others looked genuinely concerned. Brenda was good at this, playing on fears, making reasonable things sound dangerous. Therefore, Brenda said, pulling out a printed document, the board moves to invoke Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws, which allows us to require immediate removal of any structure or installation that poses a threat to community safety. Mr. Kellerman will have 30 days to remove this facility or face fines of $500 per day until compliance is achieved. She looked directly at me, a triumphant smile playing at her lips. Does the resident in question have anything to say before we vote? I stood up slowly, opened my binder, and walked to the front of the room. Yes, Madam President, I do. May I? She hadn't expected me to be polite. It threw her off just enough. She gestured impatiently at the space next to her table. First, I said, addressing the room, not her, let's establish some facts. The fuel pump on my property is a commercial-grade diesel storage and dispensing system installed by a licensed contractor in full compliance with all county regulations. I pulled out the first tabbed section and held it up. Here are my agricultural exemption permits, approved by the county. My property is zoned for agricultural use due to its size and my stated intention to use it for equipment maintenance. Tab 2. Here is the fire marshal inspection report, signed off just 6 weeks ago. The system includes double-walled containment tanks, automatic shutoff valves, leak detection, and fire suppression systems that exceed commercial standards. I saw Brenda's smile faltering. Tab 3. Here are the environmental compliance certifications, confirming the installation poses 0 risk to groundwater or soil. And here, tab 4, is my liability insurance policy, which covers up to $5 million in damages in the unlikely event of any incident. I closed the binder and looked around the room. Mrs. Ashworth has framed this as a safety issue, but every single safety concern she raised is addressed by professional engineering, legal permits, and regulatory oversight. The real question is, does the HOA have the authority to override county permits and state law? That's when I played my ace. I've also invited someone to this meeting to address those safety concerns directly. Fire Marshal Davidson, would you mind standing? A rond man in the back row stood up. He'd been sitting quietly the whole time, and I don't think Brenda had even noticed him. Fire Marshal Jim Davidson, 30-year veteran, and coincidentally the same person who'd signed off on my installation. The room went completely silent. Folks, I've inspected Mr. Kellerman's setup personally. It's safer than 90% of the commercial gas stations in this county. Double containment, top-of-the-line leak detection, automatic suppression. If all fuel storage was this well done, my job would be a lot easier. He sat back down. Brenda's face had gone from confident to pale to red. So, I said, turning back to her, unless the HOA has safety expertise that exceeds the fire marshal's, I'd suggest this vote is premature. Furthermore, any attempt to fine me for a legally permitted installation would constitute harassment and could expose the HOA to significant legal liability. I let that hang in the air for a moment. But I'm a reasonable man. If there are genuine concerns from my neighbors, I'm happy to address them. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to be a good neighbor and to follow the law. The vote never happened. One of the other board members, a nervous guy named Phil, made a motion to table the discussion pending legal review. It passed unanimously, with Brenda abstaining, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. As people filed out, several came up to shake my hand and thank me. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "Beautifully done," he whispered. But as I packed up my binder and headed for the door, I caught Brenda's expression. She wasn't defeated. She was furious.
Escalation and the private investigator. After the HOA meeting, I thought Brenda might back down. Maybe not apologize, people like her don't apologize, but at least leave me alone. Instead, she declared war. First came the zoning inspector, showing up on a Tuesday morning claiming there'd been multiple complaints about illegal construction on my property. I walked him through everything, showed him my permits, and he left shaking his head, muttering something about waste of time. Then the county health department received an anonymous tip that I was storing hazardous materials without proper permits. Another inspection, another cleared report. The fire department got a call about suspicious fumes coming from my garage. Fire Marshal Davidson showed up personally, walked around for 5 minutes, and told me off the record that he knew exactly who was making these calls. Code enforcement, environmental services, even animal control got called. Someone claimed I was hoarding diesel fuel for illegal purposes and that the fumes were making neighborhood pets sick. I've investigated organized crime rings with less coordination. Every inspector who came out was apologetic. They could see it was harassment, but they had to respond to complaints. That's how the system works, and Brenda knew it. She was using the bureaucracy as a weapon, trying to exhaust me, hoping I'd just give up and move away. But I'd dealt with more than HOA presidents in my career. I'd interviewed cartel members, negotiated with hostage takers, and once talked down a man threatening to blow up a courthouse. Brenda Ashworth was persistent, I'd give her that, but she was out of her league. The real escalation came 3 weeks after the HOA meeting. I was at the station. Yes, I still went to work every day, though I hadn't advertised my position to the neighborhood, when my desk phone rang. "Chief Kellerman, this is David Brennan. I'm a private investigator, and I need to talk to you about something unusual." "Go on," I said. "Sir, I was hired 2 days ago by a woman named Brenda Ashworth. She paid me $2,000 up front and promised another $1,000 as a bonus if I could find anything, and I'm quoting here, arrest-worthy, about a Marcus Kellerman living at 1847 Oakwood Drive." I leaned back in my chair. "Is that so?" "Yes, sir. She gave me your address, your vehicle description, and a whole rant about how you're some kind of dangerous criminal running an illegal fuel operation and probably involved in organized crime. She wanted me to dig into your finances, your background, any arrests or complaints, anything that would prove what a monster you really are." "And what did you find, Mr. Brennan?" There was a pause, and then he laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "Sir, it took me about 4 hours to figure out you're the police chief. I ran a basic background check and your name popped up in about 50 newspaper articles. Decorated military service, 28 years in law enforcement, current chief of the city police department. When I dug into the fuel pump issue, I found all your permits, all the inspections, everything completely legal and above board. And you're calling me because? Because, sir, I don't do illegal surveillance, and I sure as hell don't help people harass police chiefs. But also because I think you should know what she's doing. She's not just complaining to the HOA, she's actively trying to destroy your life, and she has no idea who she's messing with. I thanked Brennan for his honesty and integrity. He refused to take any more money from Brenda and said he was sending her a refund minus expenses, along with a letter stating he'd found nothing actionable and was terminating the contract. After I hung up, I sat there for a long moment staring at the phone. This had crossed a line. Brenda wasn't just being a nuisance anymore. She was actively investigating me, trying to dig up dirt, trying to find something, anything she could use against me. The fact that she'd hired a PI meant she was spending real money on this vendetta. It was time to start looking into Brenda Ashworth.
The false police report started the following week. I was in a budget meeting with the city council when Lieutenant Sarah Chen, yes, Officer Chen's older sister, one of my best investigators, knocked and asked to speak with me privately. We stepped into the hallway. Chief, we have a situation. A Brenda Ashworth filed a report claiming you've been stalking her. She says you've been driving past her house multiple times a day, sitting in your car watching her property, and that you confronted her in a grocery store parking lot and made threatening statements. I took a breath. When did these alleged incidents occur? Sarah consulted her notes. She claims the driving past incidents have been ongoing for 2 weeks. The parking lot confrontation was supposedly last Thursday around 6 p.m. at the Safeway on Main Street. Last Thursday at 6 p.m.? I was here at the station in a meeting with the mayor and the DA. There were about 8 witnesses and security footage. I figured, Sarah said. But Chief, because you're named in the complaint, you need to recuse yourself. I'll handle the investigation personally. This is why I valued Sarah. By the book, even when it was uncomfortable. Do it right, I said. Treat it like any other case. Interview her, get her statement, check everything. Over the next 3 days, Sarah dismantled Brenda's claims methodically. The stalking route Brenda claimed I was taking, it was literally the only route from my house to the main road. I drove past her street because I had no choice unless I wanted to go 5 miles out of my way. Sarah pulled my vehicle's GPS data. Yes, all department vehicles have tracking, and showed that I'd driven that route exactly twice per day, morning and evening, going to and from work. No stops, no slowing down, just normal traffic. The grocery store confrontation? Store security footage showed I'd been nowhere near that Safeway on Thursday evening. I'd actually been at a completely different grocery store across town, time-stamped on the receipt Sarah found in my trash at home when she searched my property, with my permission, as part of the investigation. Quiet satisfaction. Sarah documented everything in a report that concluded Brenda had filed false statements. Under normal circumstances, we would charge her. But I had a different idea. Hold off on charges, I told Sarah. Just close it as unfounded and keep the file active. I want to see what else she does. Because here's what I'd learned in 30 decades of law enforcement. People who make false reports usually don't stop at one. They escalate. And each false report is another charge, another piece of evidence of a pattern. I was building a case. I just didn't know for what yet. That weekend, I did something I probably should have done earlier. I requested the HOA financial records. As a homeowner and dues-paying member, I had the right to review them. The bylaws were clear. I sent a formal written request to the HOA board, citing the specific bylaw provision, and asked for all financial records for the past 2 years. Brenda responded by saying the records were under review and would be available in due course. That's when I knew I was onto something. I've been a cop for almost 30 decades. I know what guilty behavior looks like. Innocent people don't delay.
They don't make excuses. They don't suddenly need time to prepare records that should already be organized and available. I gave her 2 weeks, then sent a second request, this time copying all the HOA board members and citing the specific timeline requirements in the bylaws. One of the board members, Phil, the nervous guy who tabled the fuel pump vote, called me personally. "Marcus, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but Brenda's been stalling on purpose. She keeps saying the files are disorganized and she needs to compile everything. But here's the thing. I've asked to see the records too, just routine board business, and she keeps putting me off. I'm starting to think something's wrong." "Phil," I said carefully, "do you have access to the HOA bank accounts?" "I'm supposed to. I'm the treasurer. But Brenda had the bank accounts changed to require only her signature about a month after she became president, said it would make paying bills easier." There it was. "Phil," I said carefully, "I need you to do something for me. As treasurer, you have the right to request statements directly from the bank. Can you do that?" Yeah, I suppose I can." "Do it. Request the last 2 statements for all HOA accounts. Don't tell Brenda. When you get them, call me." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you think she's stealing?" "I think we need to look at the records before we assume anything. But yes, I think there's a problem." Phil got the bank statements 4 days later. He called me at 9 p.m., and I could hear the shakiness in his voice. "Marcus, you need to see this. Can I come over?" 20 minutes later, we were sitting at my kitchen table, bank statements spread between us, and Phil looked like he might be sick. "The HOA collects about $70,000 a year in dues," he said, pointing at the deposit records. "Our expenses should be maybe $40,000-50,000. Landscaping, insurance, common area maintenance, utilities for the clubhouse. We should have a healthy reserve." He pulled out the most recent statement. "We have $4,000 in the account. Marcus, we should have at least $60,000-70,000 saved. Where did it all go?" I pulled the statements closer and started going through the withdrawals systematically. Ashworth Landscaping Services, $2,500 per month. Legal consultation to Ashworth and Associates, $1,800 per month. Roof repair, contractor B. Ashworth, $12,000. Electrical work, Ashworth Electric, $8,500, on and on. Investigator mode, clinical. "Phil," I said slowly, "do you know if any of these vendors are legitimate?" "I've never heard of them. We use Greenscape for landscaping, have for 10 years. We have a lawyer on retainer, but it's definitely not Ashworth and Associates. And we had the clubhouse roof done 3 years ago. It doesn't need repairs." I pulled out my phone and started searching. Ashworth Landscaping Services, registered business owner, Brenda Ashworth. Ashworth and Associates, registered agent, Robert Ashworth. Quick cross-reference showed that was Brenda's brother. Electrical contractor, B. Ashworth. Brian Ashworth, her son. Grim satisfaction. "Phil," I said slowly, "I think we're looking at embezzlement, systematic embezzlement. She's been funneling HOA money to family members through fake or inflated contracts." I started adding numbers. Rough estimate, just from what I could see in front of me, $47,000 over 18 months. Righteous determination. "Here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to make copies of all of these statements. Second, we're going to document every suspicious payment. Third, I'm going to reach out to some people I know, and we're going to do this properly. Because if Brenda Ashworth wants to play games, she just picked the wrong opponent."
Building the case. Monday morning, I walked into the district attorney's office with a file folder under my arm and a request that had nothing to do with my official duties. "Chief Kellerman," DA Patricia Morrison said, surprised, "I wasn't expecting you. Is this about the Henderson case?" "No, Pat. This is personal, and I need to keep it separate from my role as chief. I'm here as a private citizen and a crime victim." Her eyebrows went up. I handed her the folder. "I believe I'm a victim of HOA fraud and embezzlement, along with about 60 other homeowners in my subdivision. I'd like to report it formally and request that your office investigate." For the next hour, I walked Pat through everything. The bank statements Phil had obtained, the fake vendor companies, the timeline of Brenda's behavior, the false police reports. I was careful to separate my personal conflict with Brenda from the financial crimes. This wasn't about revenge, this was about the law. Pat called in one of her financial crimes prosecutors, a sharp young woman named Jessica Torres, who specialized in fraud cases. Together, we went through the evidence methodically. "This is solid preliminary evidence," Jessica said, making notes, "but we'll need more. We'll need to interview the alleged vendors, verify that the work wasn't actually done, trace the money flow. It'll take a few weeks." "I understand. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking that this be investigated like any other financial crime." "Chief," Pat said carefully, "you understand that because you're personally involved, there's going to be extra scrutiny. We need to make sure everything is above board, no appearance of impropriety." "I wouldn't have it any other way." She nodded. "All right, we'll open an investigation. Jessica will be the lead. Chief, I'm going to ask that you step back and let us handle this. No police resources, no using your position. You've done the right thing bringing this to us, but now it's our case." "Understood." While the DA's office began their investigation, I worked another angle, building community support. Tom Harrison had become a good friend over the past months, and he introduced me to other residents who were fed up with Brenda's HOA reign. We started meeting informally at a local diner, just neighbors having coffee and discussing community issues. What I learned was enlightening and depressing. Margaret Peterson, a retired nurse, had been fined $800 for planting roses in her front yard, wrong flower type per the approved landscaping list that Brenda had created without a vote. The Johnson family had received a violation notice because their teenage son's basketball hoop was unsightly and demanded its removal within 48 hours. Elderly Mr. Wu had been fined for parking his classic car, a pristine 1967 Mustang, in his own driveway for more than 24 hours, under a rule about inoperable vehicles that clearly didn't apply. Every single person at that table had a story. Petty tyranny, selective enforcement, rules that appeared out of nowhere. "Here's the thing," I said during one of our coffee meetings. "Brenda has power because we gave it to her through apathy. 7 people voted in that election. 7. There are 120 homes in Willowbrook Estates. If we want change, we need to engage. But the bylaws are on her side. She can pretty much do whatever she wants as president." "Not if we vote her out. The bylaws require a special meeting if 15% of homeowners petition for one. That's 18 signatures. We can do that." Tom leaned forward. "And what happens at this special meeting?" "We call for a vote of no confidence. We demand a financial audit. We take back control of this HOA and run it the way it's supposed to be run, for the benefit of the community, not one person's power trip." Over the next week, we gathered signatures. It wasn't hard. People were angry, and they'd been waiting for someone to stand up to Brenda. Within 5 days, we had 32 signatures, almost double what we needed. I drafted the petition myself, keeping it formal and professional. We weren't attacking Brenda personally. We were requesting transparency, accountability, and a review of recent HOA actions. We submitted it on a Friday afternoon, hand-delivered to Brenda's mailbox with copies to the other board members and to every homeowner in the subdivision. Per the bylaws, she had 14 days to schedule the meeting. The trap was set. Now, we just had to wait for her to walk into it.
Brenda's response to the petition was creative. Instead of scheduling the meeting we'd requested, she called her own emergency board session for the following Tuesday, a full week before our petition deadline. The notice went out via email on Saturday morning. Subject line, "Urgent emergency meeting regarding community safety threats." Tom forwarded it to me within minutes of receiving it. "Marcus, what is she doing?" I read through the email carefully. She was clever, I had to give her that. She wasn't mentioning the petition at all. Instead, she claimed to have received information from federal authorities about potential homeland security violations related to my fuel storage facility. She was calling the meeting to discuss immediate protective measures for the community. "She's trying to get ahead of the narrative," I told Tom over the phone. She knows the petition is coming, knows people are angry, so she's creating a crisis, make me look like the threat, rally people around her leadership, and undermine our credibility before the real meeting happens. Can she do that? The bylaws give the president broad authority to call emergency meetings. Technically, yes, but this is going to backfire on her spectacularly. How can you be sure? Because she's about to commit several crimes in front of witnesses, and she doesn't even know it. Building tension toward Tuesday. I spent the weekend preparing, but not in the way Brenda expected. I didn't gather more permits or documents. Instead, I made 3 calls. The first was to David Brennan, the private investigator who'd contacted me weeks earlier. Mr. Brennan, you said in your call that you maintain professional standards. I'd like to hire you for a legitimate investigation. I need documentation of every HOA violation notice issued in the past 6 months, every fine levied, and patterns of enforcement. Can you do that? Absolutely, Chief. That's all public record through the HOA. I can have it compiled by Monday. The second call was to an old Army buddy, James Patterson, who now worked for the Department of Homeland Security. Jim, I need a favor. Can you be available Tuesday evening for a 5-minute phone call? I have an HOA president who's about to claim federal authority she doesn't have, and I'd like you on standby to clarify actual DHS policy. Jim laughed. Is this about that diesel pump situation you mentioned last month? It is. Marcus, I've seen your setup. You sent me photos, remember? I told you then it was completely compliant with all federal regulations. There's zero DHS interest in your fuel storage. If someone's claiming otherwise, they're lying. That's what I need you to say, officially, on a recorded call. Will you do it? For you? Absolutely. This I've got to hear. The third call was to DA Morrison. Pat, hypothetically speaking, if someone were to fabricate federal documents or falsely claim federal authority to intimidate others, what would that constitute? Falsifying federal documents is a federal crime. False impersonation of a federal officer or misrepresentation of federal authority could be wire fraud if done via electronic communication, plus potential obstruction of justice charges. Why? Just preparing for all possibilities. I'll keep you informed. Tuesday evening, the community clubhouse was packed. Easily 70 residents showed up, more than double the previous meeting's attendance. Brenda had created her crisis, and people were paying attention. I arrived early and took a seat in the back row with my phone in my pocket with Jim Patterson's number ready to dial. Brenda was already at the front table, and this time she'd brought reinforcements. 2 people I didn't recognize sat flanking her, a man in an ill-fitting suit and a woman with a briefcase that screamed, "I'm important." At 7 p.m. sharp, Brenda called the meeting to order. Her voice was different tonight, less imperious, more grave. She was playing the concerned leader protecting her community. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began. "I know this is inconvenient, but I've received information that requires immediate action. As your HOA president, I have a duty to protect this community, and that's exactly what I intend to do." She gestured to the man in the suit. "This is Robert Ashworth, an attorney specializing in federal regulatory compliance. I've asked him here tonight to explain the serious legal violations that have been brought to my attention regarding Mr. Kellerman's property." Robert Ashworth, her brother, the same one who'd been billing the HOA for legal services. Robert stood up, pulling out a folder with an official-looking seal on the cover. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a rehearsed voice, "I've been reviewing federal regulations regarding fuel storage, and I've discovered that Mr. Kellerman's facility is in direct violation of Department of Homeland Security guidelines established after September 11th. Any private fuel storage facility exceeding 500 gallons requires federal registration and regular inspections for potential terrorism-related concerns." He held up the folder. I have here documentation from the Department of Homeland Security outlining these requirements. Mr. Kellerman has not registered his facility, has not undergone federal inspection, and therefore is operating an illegal installation that poses not just a safety risk, but potential national security threat. Murmurs rippled through the room. I saw several neighbors looking at me with confusion and concern. Brenda stood back up. Given the severity of this situation, I'm proposing an emergency measure. The HOA will report this violation to federal authorities tonight, and Mr. Kellerman must immediately shut down his facility pending federal review. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action and fines of $1,000 per day. She looked at me directly in the back row. Mr. Kellerman, do you have anything to say in your defense? I stood up slowly, pulled out my phone, and walked toward the front of the room. Every eye was on me. Just a couple of things, Mrs. Ashworth. First, I'd like to see that DHS documentation you mentioned. Robert Ashworth clutched the folder. This is official federal documentation. It's not for public. Let me rephrase. I'm formally requesting to examine the documents you're citing as the basis for accusing me of federal crimes. If you refuse, that's interesting in itself. Brenda jumped in. We don't have to show you anything. The documentation has been reviewed by legal counsel. Your brother, you mean, who's been billing the HOA for legal services despite having no expertise in federal regulatory law, as far as I can tell. The room got very quiet. I turned to address everyone. Here's what's actually true. There is no federal registration for private fuel storage under 5,000 gallons. There is no DHS database of residential fuel pumps. The regulations Mr. Ashworth is citing don't exist. But don't take my word for it. Let me call someone who would actually know. I dialed Jim Patterson's number on speakerphone. He answered on the second ring. This is Special Agent Patterson, Department of Homeland Security. Who am I speaking with? Jim, this is Marcus Kellerman. I'm at an HOA meeting where claims are being made about DHS regulations on private fuel storage. I have you on speaker. Can you clarify actual DHS policy? Certainly. DHS has no registration requirement for private fuel storage facilities under 5,000 gallons. Commercial operations above that threshold require certain reporting, but residential use is not federally regulated beyond EPA environmental standards. Any claim that a homeowner's fuel pump requires DHS approval or inspection is false. If someone is representing themselves as having DHS authority or documentation without proper authorization, that's a serious federal offense. Thank you, Agent Patterson. That's very clear. I hung up and looked at Brenda and her brother. Robert had gone pale. Brenda's hands were shaking. So we've established that the federal documents you're citing are fabricated. Now let's talk about why you really called this meeting.
The walls closed in. I walked to the front of the room and stood next to Brenda's table. She was frozen, her brother was sweating, and the woman with the briefcase, who I now suspected was just a prop, looked like she wanted to disappear. Mrs. Ashworth received a petition last week, I said, addressing the room. 32 homeowners requested a special meeting to discuss HOA finances and leadership. Per the bylaws, she has to honor that petition. Instead, she called this meeting, fabricated a federal crisis, and attempted to use fake documents to intimidate and threaten me. I pulled out my own folder, thank you, David Brennan, and held it up. This is a compiled record of every HOA violation notice and fine issued in the past 6 months. What you'll find interesting is the pattern. Violations and fines are almost exclusively issued to homeowners who have questioned Mrs. Ashworth's decisions or who signed the petition for a special meeting. I opened the folder and read from Brennan's summary. Margaret Peterson, who voiced concerns about HOA finances at a meeting in August, 3 violations, $1,200 in fines. The Johnson family, who asked about missing landscaping funds, 2 violations, $800.
Mr. Wu, who questioned why the HOA needed new legal counsel, 4 violations, $1,600 in fines, and a threat of foreclosure. Meanwhile, homeowners who support Mrs. Ashworth or remain silent, 0 violations, not 1, despite the fact that several have the exact same infractions: flowers in wrong colors, cars in driveways, basketball hoops. The rules are being selectively enforced as retaliation. Tom stood up from the audience. That's absolutely what's happening. I've watched her target anyone who speaks up. Others started nodding, murmuring agreement. The mood in the room was shifting. Brenda finally found her voice. This is slander. This is defamation. You can't prove. I can prove all of it. Every violation notice is documented. The pattern is clear. But let's talk about something else, Mrs. Ashworth. Let's talk about where the HOA money is going. Phil stood up from where he'd been sitting near the front. He looked nervous but determined. As HOA treasurer, I'd like to make a motion for an immediate financial audit. I've reviewed bank statements that show significant discrepancies, and I believe the membership has a right to know where our dues are going. I second that motion, Tom called out. All in favor? Phil said. A forest of hands went up, at least 50 people. Brenda was shaking her head. This is out of order. This isn't the proper procedure. Actually, per the bylaws, any board member can call for a financial review, and a simple majority of present members can approve it. I count at least 50 votes in favor. The motion passes. Fine, Brenda shouted, her composure finally cracking. You want to see the finances? You want to question everything I've done? I've been working tirelessly for this community while you people sit around and complain. Do you have any idea how much time and effort it takes to run an HOA? I've sacrificed. You've stolen $47,000, I said quietly. The room went dead silent. Brenda's mouth opened and closed. What? That's insane. That's completely... Ashworth Landscaping Services, owned by you, billing $2,500 per month for services that our actual landscaping company provides for $1,200. Ashworth and Associates Legal Consulting, your brother's firm, $1,800 per month when our previous attorney charged $500. Electrical work by your son, roof repairs that were never done. It's all documented in bank records, Mrs. Ashworth. The DA's office has been investigating for 3 weeks. Her face went from red to white. You've been investigating me? No. I reported suspected financial crimes to the district attorney's office, provided evidence as a private citizen, and stepped back. The investigation is being conducted by the proper authorities. I haven't used my position as police chief in any way except to ensure everything is handled properly. Wait, someone in the audience said. Did you just say you're the police chief? I turned to face the room. Yes, I'm Police Chief Marcus Kellerman. I've been in law enforcement for 28 years. I moved to this neighborhood for peace and quiet after my wife passed, and I've tried to be a good neighbor. I haven't advertised my profession because it wasn't relevant until Brenda started filing false police reports, hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on me, and escalating what should have been a simple neighborhood disagreement into a criminal conspiracy. The room was processing. I could see the pieces falling into place for people. The fuel pump inspection, why I knew so much about permits and regulations, why I stayed calm through all of Brenda's attacks. Margaret Peterson started laughing. Just a small chuckle at first, then fuller. Oh my God, Margaret said. Brenda, you've been trying to destroy the police chief. You called the cops on the police chief. Others started laughing too. Not cruel laughter, but the kind that comes from absurdity and relief. Brenda stood up, knocking her chair backward. This is a setup. This whole thing is a conspiracy. You people are letting him manipulate you. He's been targeting me because I stood up to him, because I wouldn't let him break the rules. He's using his position to... The doors at the back of the room opened. 2 detectives walked in, Martinez and Johnson, both from my department's financial crimes unit. They weren't in uniform, but they had badges on their belts, visible. Mrs. Brenda Ashworth, Detective Martinez said. Brenda turned, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Yes? We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and filing false police reports. You have the right to remain silent. The room was absolutely still as Martinez read Brenda her rights. Her brother Robert tried to intervene, claiming attorney-client privilege, but Martinez calmly explained that he could contact his own attorney. He wasn't representing his sister at this arrest. Brenda looked at me as Martinez guided her hands behind her back for handcuffs. For just a moment, I saw it, the full realization of what she'd done, who she'd targeted, how completely she'd destroyed herself. "I tried to tell you no," I said, quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. All I wanted was to be left alone.
After the detectives led Brenda out of the clubhouse, the room erupted. Questions, exclamations, people clustering in groups trying to process what they just witnessed. Phil called the meeting back to order. He was the senior remaining board member, so it fell to him. "Okay, everyone, please, can we have some order?" It took several minutes, but people eventually settled back into their seats. The energy in the room had completely transformed. The fear and tension that had characterized Brenda's reign was gone, replaced by shock and, honestly, a bit of giddy relief. Tom stood up. "Marcus, I think you owe us an explanation, the full story." I nodded and moved back to the front of the room. "I moved here 6 months ago. I'm a widower, I was looking for quiet, and I wanted space to work on my hobby, restoring vintage trucks. Everything about my fuel pump installation is legal, documented, and inspected. When Mrs. Ashworth demanded I give her free diesel fuel and I refused, she decided to make my life difficult." I walked them through the timeline, the false 911 call, the harassment through county inspectors, the HOA violations, the private investigator, the false stalking reports. Every time she escalated, she committed additional crimes. Filing false police reports is a crime. Harassment through governmental processes is a crime. And when Phil came to me concerned about the HOA finances and I saw the bank statements, embezzlement became part of the picture. I want to be clear about something. I reported the financial crimes to the DA's office as a private citizen. I provided evidence and then stepped back. The investigation was handled by the DA's Financial Crimes Unit, not by my department. When Mrs. Ashworth filed false police reports against me, I recused myself and had Lieutenant Chen investigate. Everything was done by the book, because that's the only way to do it right. Mr. Wu raised his hand. "But you let her keep going. You let her dig herself deeper." "I documented her behavior," I corrected. "Every false report, every harassment tactic, every retaliatory fine, it all became evidence of a pattern. If I'd arrested her the first time she filed the false report, she could have claimed it was a misunderstanding. But a pattern? That's prosecutable. That's justice." Margaret Peterson asked the question I knew was coming. "How much did she steal?" Phil stood up with his folder of bank statements. "Based on what I can document, approximately $47,000 over 18 months. The DA will determine the exact amount, but it's substantial." He walked everyone through the same analysis I'd done weeks earlier. Fake vendor companies, inflated contracts, services billed but never performed. The landscaping company she claimed to hire, her own company, was billing us $2,500 a month. Our actual landscaper charges $1,200, and we were still paying him too, so we were paying for the service twice. Her brother's law firm billed us 18 months of legal consultation at $1,800 a month. I called our previous attorney, and he said Brenda told him his services were no longer needed. He was charging us $500 a month and actually did work. Her brother never attended a single HOA meeting or provided any legal documents. "The roof repair is the blatant one," Phil continued. "She authorized a $12,000 payment to a contractor named B. Ashworth, her son, for emergency roof repairs to the clubhouse. I had a roofer come out last week to look at something else, and I asked him about the roof. He said it's in excellent condition and was clearly redone within the last 5 years. We have records of that repair. There was no emergency. The work was never done." Someone asked, "What about all the fines she issued? Will people get their money back?" "That's a good question for the DA," I said. "But typically, in cases of abuse of authority, restitution is part of the sentencing. If fines were issued as retaliation rather than legitimate violations, they can be challenged and potentially refunded." For the next hour, we talked. People shared their experiences with Brenda's HOA regime, the arbitrary rules, the sudden fines, the fear of speaking up. It was therapeutic, in a way, people realizing they weren't alone, that the problem wasn't them.
Phil made several motions, all of which passed unanimously. First, an immediate financial audit by an independent accounting firm. Second, suspension of all pending violations and fines until they could be reviewed by the new board. Third, a special election in 30 days to fill the HOA president position and reorganize the board. Fourth, a revision of the HOA bylaws to include more financial oversight, term limits, and protections against retaliation. As people started to leave, many came up to shake my hand or thank me. Margaret Peterson gave me a hug. "You could have just moved," she said, "found somewhere easier. Why did you fight?" I thought about that for a moment. Because my wife always said the only thing necessary for bad people to succeed is for good people to do nothing. I'm not special. I just happen to have the knowledge and resources to fight back. But every one of you who signed that petition, who spoke up, who refused to be bullied, you fought back too. That's what made the difference. Tom clapped me on the shoulder as people filed out. "So, Chief, now that everyone knows who you are, think the neighborhood will get weird?" I laughed. "Probably, but at least they'll stop asking me to give them free gas."
The legal process moved forward with the inevitable grinding slowness of the justice system. Brenda Ashworth was arraigned 3 days after her arrest. The charges were extensive: embezzlement, wire fraud, filing false police reports, obstruction of justice, and misuse of HOA funds. Her bail was set at $50,000, which she posted through a bondsman. Her brother, Robert, the attorney, was also charged as an accomplice for his role in the fraudulent billing scheme. His law license was suspended pending investigation by the state bar. The DA's office built a comprehensive case. Jessica Torres, the prosecutor, was thorough and meticulous. She traced every dollar, interviewed every fake vendor, documented every inflated contract. The evidence was overwhelming. I stayed out of it, as promised. My role was done. I'd been the catalyst, the initial reporter, but I was also a witness and victim. The investigation and prosecution had to stand on its own without any appearance that I'd used my position inappropriately. The Willowbrook Estates community, meanwhile, underwent a transformation. The special election drew 93 voters, the highest turnout in HOA history. Tom Harrison was elected president. Margaret Peterson became treasurer. A retired accountant named Richard Lee took over as secretary. They ran on a platform of transparency, common sense, and community service rather than control. One of their first acts was to hire a forensic accountant to complete the full financial audit. The final number was actually higher than we'd initially estimated: $52,000 embezzled over the 18-month period of Brenda's presidency. The new board immediately implemented changes. All HOA finances were posted online monthly, accessible to every homeowner. No single officer could authorize expenditures over $500 without board approval. All contracts required competitive bids from at least 3 vendors with no family members of board members eligible. Violation notices now required photographic evidence and a review process before fines could be levied. For me, life settled into something approaching normal. The neighborhood did get a bit weird at first. Kids would dare each other to knock on the police chief's door, and I'd get knowing nods from neighbors when I drove past. But eventually, the novelty wore off, and I was just Marcus again. My fuel pump, ironically, became a genuine community asset. During a major storm that winter that knocked out power for 3 days, I ran an informal lending service. Neighbors could come get diesel for their generators, and we'd settle up later when power was restored. No charge, just neighbors helping neighbors. I finished restoring that 1952 Chevy pickup too. Powder blue, just like my grandfather's. I took it to a local car show and won Best Restoration in the vintage truck category. Standing there with the trophy, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. The legal resolution took 4 months to get to trial, but in the end, there wasn't actually a trial. Faced with the mountain of evidence, Brenda's attorney, not her brother, who was dealing with his own legal troubles, advised her to take a plea deal. She pled guilty to embezzlement, wire fraud, and 3 counts of filing false police reports. The other charges were dropped as part of the agreement. I attended the sentencing hearing, not out of vindictiveness, but because I'd been the initial complainant and it felt important to see it through. Brenda looked smaller in the courtroom than she had in that clubhouse. Quieter. The imperious HOA president was gone, replaced by a woman facing the consequences of her choices. Her attorney presented a mitigation case. She'd been under stress, made poor decisions, was deeply sorry. They brought character witnesses who talked about her volunteer work before the HOA presidency, her family, her contributions to other community organizations. Judge Catherine Morrison, no relation to the DA, listened to everything, reviewed the pre-sentence report, and then spoke. Mrs. Ashworth, I've presided over many white-collar crime cases in my career. What makes yours particularly troubling is not just the theft, though $52,000 is significant. It's the abuse of trust and the vindictiveness with which you wielded power. You weren't just stealing from your neighbor's HOA accounts. You were weaponizing your position to retaliate against anyone who questioned you. You filed false police reports on a man simply because he refused to give you free fuel. You fabricated federal documents and claimed false federal authority to intimidate and threaten. These actions show a pattern of behavior that goes beyond financial crime. They show a willingness to harm others, to abuse authority, and to corrupt systems meant to serve the community. Judge Morrison sentenced Brenda to 18 months in federal prison. Federal because the wire fraud charges involved interstate communications, plus 3 years of supervised probation. She was ordered to pay full restitution of $52,000 to the HOA, plus fines and court costs totaling an additional $15,000. As they led Brenda out of the courtroom, she looked at me. I expected anger, maybe hatred. Instead, I saw something else. Resignation, maybe. I nodded slightly. Not friendship, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. This is where choices lead.
6 months after Brenda's sentencing, I was working in my garage on a Saturday afternoon when Tom Harrison stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. "Got a minute?" he asked. We sat in lawn chairs outside my garage, watching the sunset over Willowbrook Estates, and he asked me something I'd been asking myself. "Do you ever feel bad about what happened to her?" I took a long drink before answering. "That's complicated," I said finally. "Do I feel bad that she's in prison? Yes and no. She made choices, illegal choices, harmful choices. She could have stopped at any point, after the first false police report, after the harassment, after the embezzlement started. She didn't. She escalated. But do I take pleasure in her suffering? No. I've been a cop too long for that. I've seen how people's lives spiral, how small, bad decisions become bigger ones, how pride and ego can drive someone to destroy themselves. Brenda wasn't evil. She was entitled, petty, and corrupt, but she wasn't a monster. She was just a person who got a taste of power and let it corrupt her." Tom nodded slowly. "The HOA is so different now. It's actually useful. We're getting things done, real things, not just enforcement of stupid rules. That's because it's serving the community instead of one person's ego," I said. "That's what these organizations are supposed to do. Pool resources, maintain common areas, protect property values through reasonable standards, not give someone a fiefdom to rule over." We talked for a while about power, about how easily it corrupts, about how important accountability and transparency are, not just in HOAs, but in all institutions, police departments, governments, businesses, anywhere people have authority over others. "You know what the real lesson is?" I said. "It's not about Brenda. It's about all of us. 7 people voted in the election that made her president. 7. Everyone else was too busy, too apathetic, too convinced their vote didn't matter. That apathy created a vacuum, and Brenda filled it. If the community had been engaged from the start, if people had shown up to meetings and asked questions and demanded accountability, none of this would have happened. Brenda got away with it because people let her." "But you stopped her," Tom said. "We stopped her," I corrected. "I had specific knowledge and resources, sure, but Tom organized the petition,
Phil got the bank records. Margaret rallied the neighbors. Dozens of people showed up to those meetings. It took all of us. Tom finished his beer and stood to leave. Thanks for not just moving away when she started causing problems. A lot of people would have. After he left, I sat there for a while, thinking about Sarah, my wife. She would have liked this neighborhood, the way it had come together. She always believed in communities, in people looking out for each other. I'd moved here trying to escape memories, but what I'd found instead was a reminder of what she'd always taught me. You can't run from problems. You can't opt out of community. You have to engage, to stand up, to be present. Not just as a police chief, but as a neighbor, a citizen, a person. It's been 2 years now since that night in the clubhouse when Brenda was arrested. The HOA has become a model for other subdivisions in the area. Tom served 1 term as president and then stepped down, encouraging new leadership. The financial transparency practices they implemented have been copied by 3 other local HOAs. People actually show up to meetings now, not out of fear, but because they're genuinely interested in their community. Phil, the nervous treasurer who first helped expose the embezzlement, found his confidence. He now teaches workshops on HOA financial management at the community college. He told me once that standing up to Brenda changed his life, showed him he was capable of courage when it mattered. Margaret Peterson, the retired nurse who'd been fined for planting the wrong flowers, now runs a community garden on HOA common space. Beautiful roses, by the way. All the wrong colors according to Brenda's old rules, and absolutely gorgeous. Mr. Wu still parks his pristine 1967 Mustang in his driveway, and now we have informal classic car meetups once a month where owners from all over the county come to show their vehicles. The HOA sponsors it. Brenda served her full 18 months in federal prison. She was released 4 months ago. From what I understand, she moved to another state to live with family. Her divorce was finalized while she was incarcerated. Turned out her husband had his own grievances about her controlling behavior. I don't take pleasure in that. Her life was destroyed, her reputation ruined, her family broken. Those are serious consequences, but they were consequences she earned through her own choices. I hope she learned from them. I hope she found some peace and maybe some perspective. I genuinely do. My fuel pump, the thing that started this entire conflict, is still there, still operating perfectly. I've added a small hand-painted sign next to it. Kellerman's Emergency Fuel Service. Neighbors only, no HOA presidents. Tom says it's my best joke. I think Sarah would have appreciated it. I finished 3 more vintage truck restorations. The garage has become a gathering place. Neighbors stop by to see what I'm working on, ask advice on their own projects, or just hang out. That's what I'd wanted when I moved here. Community, connection, purpose. Professional reflection. I'm retiring from the police department in 6 months. 28 years, and it's time. I'll miss the work, but I'm ready. I've trained good people to take over, established protocols and programs that will outlast me. That's the mark of good leadership, making yourself dispensable. My retirement plans? More truck restoration, maybe some volunteer work, travel to places Sarah and I always meant to visit, and staying engaged with this community that I accidentally became part of when I just wanted to be left alone with my fuel pump. If there's a moral to this story, it's not a simple one. It's not just stand up to bullies or justice prevails. It's more nuanced than that. It's about how small powers can corrupt, how apathy enables abuse, how communities need engaged citizens, not perfect heroes, how documentation and evidence matter, how following the rules and procedures, even when it's frustrating, is what separates justice from revenge. It's about how loss, like losing Sarah, can make you want to withdraw, but sometimes the universe pushes you back into engagement whether you're ready or not. And maybe, most importantly, it's about the willingness of one person to say no, to refuse to be intimidated, to refuse to accept abuse, to refuse to look the other way, that can catalyze change that benefits everyone. I still think about that first day sometimes, when Brenda marched up my driveway and demanded I fill her Range Rover with diesel. If I'd just done it, just given her what she wanted, none of this would have happened. She'd still be stealing, still be abusing her power, still be terrorizing the neighborhood. Dozens of people would still be living under her petty tyranny. One moment, one decision, one word. No. People sometimes ask me if I regret moving to Willowbrook Estates, if I wish I'd chosen somewhere else, somewhere easier. And my answer is always the same: no. Because this place, these people, this community, they gave me something I didn't know I needed after Sarah died. They gave me a reason to care again, a reason to fight, a reason to be part of something. I've spent nearly 30 years in law enforcement. I've worked major cases, organized crime, homicides, corruption investigations that made the front page. But you know what case I'm proudest of? An HOA embezzlement scheme that recovered $52,000 and freed a small subdivision from a petty tyrant. Not because of the money, not even because of the justice, though that matters, but because it proved that ordinary people in ordinary places can stand up to abuse and win. You don't need to be the police chief, though I'll admit it helped in my particular situation. You just need to be willing to document, to organize, to refuse to accept that this is just how things are. If you're listening to this and you're dealing with your own HOA tyrant, your own workplace bully, your own petty authority figure who's making your life miserable, here's what I want you to know. Document everything. Dates, times, witnesses, copies of communications. Evidence is your friend. Know the rules. Whatever system you're dealing with, HOA bylaws, company policies, legal regulations, know them better than the person abusing them. Rules can be weapons, but they can also be shields. Build community. You're not alone, even when it feels like it. Others are suffering too, and together you're stronger than you are individually. Follow proper channels. Don't give them ammunition by breaking rules yourself. Be meticulous about doing things the right way, even when it's slower and more frustrating. And most importantly, don't let them make you afraid. Fear is the weapon that keeps abuse going. Once you decide you're not going to be afraid anymore, everything changes. It's a Saturday evening now, much like that one when Tom and I had beers and talked about power and community. I'm in my garage, working on a 1965 Ford F100 that I picked up last month. It needs a full engine rebuild, new suspension, bodywork. It's going to take me a year, maybe more. But I've got time now. I've got peace. I've got neighbors who wave when they drive past, who stop to chat, who look out for each other. I can hear kids playing basketball on the street. Someone's grilling, smells like burgers. Tom's working in his yard and I could hear his radio playing classic rock. Margaret's probably tending her garden, getting it ready for spring planting. Mr. Wu drove past in his Mustang about an hour ago, taking the long route just because it's a beautiful evening. This is what community is supposed to sound like, feel like, be like. I wonder sometimes if Brenda, wherever she is now, understands what she lost. Not just the freedom, not just the reputation, but this, genuine community, real relationships built on respect rather than fear. She could have been part of something good. She could have used her energy and organizational skills to build something lasting and positive. Instead, she chose control. She chose power over people, and she ended up with neither. There's a photo in my garage, Sarah and me on our honeymoon, 32 years ago, standing in front of my grandfather's powder blue Chevy truck. She's laughing, her head thrown back, joy radiating from her. I was probably making some terrible joke. I usually was. I look at that photo every day, and I think she'd be proud of how things turned out here. Not the arrest, not the drama. She'd have hated that. But the community that emerged afterwards, the way people came together, the way we proved that things can get better if you're willing to work for it. I did it, Sarah, I say sometimes to that photo. I found a place. I found people. I'm okay. And I am, finally. 2 years after moving here, searching for nothing but solitude and silence, I found something better. I found home. So yes, an HOA Karen called the cops when I refused to give her free gas. She didn't know I was the police chief. She didn't know I had the resources, knowledge, and stubborn determination to match her escalation for escalation. She didn't know that her vendetta would expose her own crimes and ultimately land her in federal prison. But more than that, she didn't know that her abuse of power would catalyze something positive, that her reign of petty tyranny would eventually unite a community that had been fragmented and apathetic, that her downfall would teach dozens of people that they could stand up, speak out, and make a difference. That's the real victory. Not that the bad person got caught, that happens in police work every day, but that the good people found their voices, found their courage, found each other. Brenda Ashworth thought she was building a kingdom where she ruled through fear and arbitrary authority. What she actually built, inadvertently, was a community bonded by shared resistance to tyranny. By the time she was arrested, she'd already lost. She just didn't know it yet. The sun is setting now, painting my garage in golden light. The diesel pump, that ridiculous fuel pump that started everything, hums politely in the corner of my property, legal and licensed and occasionally useful to my neighbors. I take a sip of my beer, wipe some grease off my hands, and look at the F-100's engine block I've been cleaning. Tomorrow I'll start the rebuild. Next week, Tom and I are organizing a neighborhood BBQ. Next month, Phil's teaching another HOA financial management workshop and asked me to come speak about documentation and evidence. Life is good. Community is good. Justice, imperfect as sometimes it is, was served. And me? I'm just a widower fixing old trucks in his garage, grateful that when an HOA Karen demanded free gas and I refused to give it to her, I didn't know I was starting something that would change everything. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance create the biggest ripples. Sometimes